We're constantly swimming in data signals, right? Charts go up, metrics dip down. But how do we turn all that noise into a clear explanation? Something we can actually do something with? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down right now.
So let me just ask you this straight up. You open your dashboard, first thing in the morning, and you see a key number has changed. Maybe sales are down, maybe churn is up. You see the number, but do you really know the story behind it? Do you know why?
And that, right there, is the core of the problem. Look, dashboards are fantastic tools for monitoring the what. They're like smoke alarms. They tell us when something's happening, but they almost always stop there. And here's the thing you've got to remember. Just seeing a pattern isn't the same as actually explaining it. Not even close.
So this brings us right to our first section, what I call the dashboard dilemma. It's this weird conflict we all live in now, right? We have more data than ever before, but that doesn't automatically mean we have more understanding.
So how do we get from just staring at a chart to making a smart call? Well, there's a critical step in the middle, diagnosis. A really good diagnosis doesn't just point out the symptom, profit is down. No, it digs way deeper to find the root cause. It builds that solid bridge between the data signal you see and the decision you absolutely have to make.
So what does a really strong diagnosis look like? Well, it's got to answer 4 essential questions. First, causality, the real why behind the change. Then, it identifies the specific drivers. What exactly moved the needle? It also has to figure out the duration, like, is this just a one-time blip, or is this the new normal? And finally, it has to get to accountability. Who or what is actually responsible for this?
Answering those questions is how we get to our next big idea, bridging the value gap. This is all about making that leap from just passively observing something to taking real, meaningful action.
And this slide just frames it perfectly. See, most of the work in BI lives in that descriptive box. It just tells us what happened. But the whole point is to get to the prescriptive box, figuring out what to do about it. Diagnostic BI, that's the bridge. That's the powerful, value-creating link that turns a simple observation into intelligence you can actually use.
All right, so how do we actually build that bridge? Let's get into the how-to in our third section here. It's a process called decomposition, and it's all about finding the true drivers.
So here's the basic idea. Think of a big, high-level number, like your EBIT margin. On its own, that number is just an outcome. It summarizes a ton of different activities. A real diagnosis doesn't stop there. It decomposes it. It breaks that big number down into its core parts, the things you can actually control, like revenue, cost of goods sold, and your operating expenses.
And boom, here's what that looks like in the real world. You see that sharp drop in EBIT margin on the chart? A normal dashboard just shows you the drop, but a diagnostic approach lets you put on different glasses to see why. Was it a cost problem? Did our expenses just explode? Was it a revenue problem? Did our prices tank or our volume dry up? Or maybe it was a risk problem, something tied to the whole market. It's the same signal, but it could have totally different drivers. And that right there, that leads us to a super important point, and it's our fourth section. This is about judgment, not just automation. Finding the right drivers takes a human brain, not just a piece of software spitting out numbers. We have this tendency to look at our dashboards like they're these perfect, objective windows into reality. But they're not. Underneath that clean, shiny surface, there are all these invisible layers of logic, calculated fields, filters, you name it. And every single one of those was put there by a person, embedding their assumptions right into the tool itself.
So when I say assumption, what are we really talking about here? Well, in BI, it's basically any choice that was made when a metric was created. For instance, in your EBIT margin calculation, did someone decide to include depreciation? When you look at revenue, is that the gross number or the net number after returns? These aren't universal truths, they're choices, and those choices shape the final number you see. And because all those assumptions are baked in, the same single data point can lead to completely different and equally valid stories. That drop in EBIT could be a story about your costs being too rigid, or it could be a story about unpredictable customer demand. Automation gives you the numbers, but it's human judgment that has to provide the narrative.
And you know what? That's okay, because in the real world, data is never, ever perfect or complete. The goal of a good diagnosis isn't to find the one single perfect answer. It's to cut through the fog enough to make a confident, informed decision, even when things are uncertain. Ambiguity isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature of doing business.
Okay, so as we start to bring this all home in our final section, we have to talk about the flip side. Diagnosis, decisions, and the dangers. Because when this whole process goes wrong, the consequences can be, well, pretty serious. The biggest, most classic trap is confusing correlation with causation. You might see two lines on a chart that move together perfectly, just like this. That's a pattern. That's an observation, but it is not an explanation. A true explanation needs a mechanism, a believable reason why one thing is actually causing the other. Without that, you're basically just making a huge business decision based on a coincidence.
So, to keep you out of trouble, here are 3 key traps to avoid at all costs. Number 1, overfitting your explanation. That's where you create this super complex story just to make it perfectly fit a few little data points. Number 2, ignoring alternative drivers. This happens all the time. You find one plausible reason and you just stop looking. And number 3, maybe the most important, treating your assumptions as facts, forgetting that the very numbers you're analyzing are built on opinions.
And this all comes down to one final, crucial point: accountability. The diagnostic work you do directly influences strategy. That strategy has real-world consequences for the business, for people's jobs. And you, the person doing the analysis, you own the liability for that explanation. You can't just blame the dashboard. That responsibility can't be delegated to a tool. Let's just let that sink in for a second. If the explanation is wrong, if the strategy built on it fails, the accountability is always human. That's the weight, and that's the importance of getting this right. So the next time you look at your dashboard, remember this: an explanation isn't something you just find in the data. It's something you build. It's a choice. And that leaves us with one last question for you to think about. What choices are hiding right now in your data?